Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another of our interviews on digital infrastructure. Today, we're joined by Mike Grigsby, who is Director of Innovation and Technology for the city of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I've been there, great place. It literally has falls there, waterfalls. Mike, let's dive straight in here very quickly. Who are you? What do you do in Sioux Falls with innovation and technology? Why are we talking today?
Ian, thank you. I appreciate it. It's great to be part of this conversation. I joined the city of Sioux Falls in April last year, right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I came on board as the Director of Innovation and Technology. Sioux Falls has been on a growing trend certainly over the last 10 years, but they've done a lot to get prepared for what the future holds, and technology plays an integral part into what the city is going to deliver over the next several years, looking out into even 2040, 2050. And taking the opportunity to look at the city from both an innovation, how that fits into all the strategies, and then the technology. What does it mean today? What does it mean tomorrow? And what does it mean really far out into the future? And I have the great fortune of working not only with our IT departments, but with our communication department, our data analysis team, as well as our digital services and Office of Innovation.
Okay. So we were talking before we got started here. You've had a pretty interesting career between being actually a police officer, working on the industry side, and now on the municipal side. So from the municipal angle here, how do you view digital infrastructure? So fiber, data center, edge, towers, et cetera, et cetera. Are these apps and services you see being deployed for internal use or for the consumer, for the resident? Is it both? How does it fit together from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's challenging to answer that question without talking about the change that's occurred. And I'll say just over the last 15 years, so much of what, especially municipalities, the mindset towards digital infrastructure has been, we have to own it. The municipality has to own it. It's on site. There's a lot of thinking around security. There was a lot of thinking around the management of that, the access to that, the latency from a transportation standpoint. But as technology has grown, there's become less of a dependence to owning it. And to further exacerbate that challenge, the cost of the talent to bring that in-house, especially for a municipality, becomes really, really challenging. The scope of what those roles need to do is not something that a municipality can really metabolize. And so municipalities really have to begin looking at how do they want their in-house talent, what they want them to focus in on, and then building incredible relationships with the service providers on the outside of that can help lower that operational cost. You think of things like cloud services, right? It used to be that all the data center, all that infrastructure was on-prem and was owned by the municipality. But the cost of owning that, the cost of disaster recovery, the cost of resiliency, it's just too much for a municipality to really metabolize. And so how do you look at those and build those right relationships with the partners, and then bring that back from in-house talent focused primarily on administration and management and governance?
Okay. So you've worked in larger metro areas as well as obviously smaller cities. Is that cost prohibitive of you? Is it cost prohibitive for something like Dallas as well as Sioux Falls in your view? Does everybody fall into that category?
Yeah, I think there's a sweet spot, and you have to understand the environment. I've worked with the city of Dallas on a lot of different projects, so I have an understanding of what their capabilities are and capabilities of cities like that. A lot of factors go into that. You look at your tax base, you look at your funding capabilities, you look at your initiatives, you look at the citizen impact and things along those lines. And I don't think there's a one size fits all. I don't think you can say, here's the formula for it. I think you have to look at it and say, here's the dynamics, here's the direction that we're going to go, here's our dynamics versus those in the direction we're going to take. For a smaller municipality, I think those partnerships are more key than they are on the larger size. And larger doesn't necessarily mean you have access to more resources. I think you just deploy your resources in a different way. So you still really have to put a sizable amount of mind share on understanding the dynamics. And I cannot put a high enough emphasis point on this. You have to understand what your outcomes are. What is it that you're truly after? And know that you're working towards that instead of traditionally what has already been in place, or always been in place, I should say.
Right. Okay. So in order to get this accomplished, then we need a partnership, as you said, between the municipality and the industry. Is it what sort of relationship is that? Is it a customer type relationship, or is it a true public private partnership? How do you see it developing?
I hate to sound cliche-ish and say it depends, but it does. It depends on what you're trying to do. When you're thinking about kind of hardened infrastructure, and I may be misstating that, but hardened infrastructure, what I would consider like fiber in the ground, right? That could end up being a true public-private partnership, depending on what assets the city has to bring to the table versus what assets the private sector partner brings to the table. That could be a true public-private partnership. Other ones are more cooperative agreements that you could look at, or it could just be a straight services contract or something along those lines. I think one of the critical points to understand, though, is anytime you enter into a partnership, whether it's a formal public-private partnership, you have to understand that the ROIs are not necessarily the same on either side, and you have to manage to those ROIs. And alignment is the key to success, right? If the ROIs are mutually exclusive, you may not know that right up front, and you could end up running into issues on the backside. If you take the time up front to understand what the outcomes are, what the needs are, what those ROIs and what needs to be satisfied on both the municipality side as well as the partner side, you can go into a really, really aligned and very strong partnership that looks at it over time instead of just project by project, right? It goes towards a long scope outcome and what the change is going to be, kind of the evolution is going to be.
Right. So if we take something like fiber, as you said, like more of a, let's call it hardened infrastructure, it's actually physically in the ground there. So what you're talking about is that, or are you talking about the fact that with fiber, it's going to have multiple uses? It could be used for the municipality. It could also be used for private industry, private businesses around the municipality as well. So we could have a shared resource there that's got a life of, a decade or two, right? So the ROI on that could be very, very different from something. It's like a cell service, 5G service, for example, for the police department. Is that the type of thing you're talking about?
All right. And back to what I mentioned just a moment ago, is you have to the municipality has to understand what assets it has and then what the value of those assets are. Mm-hmm. For example, there's communities out there that, because of their previous telecommunications agreements, and we're talking 20, 30, 40 years ago, they have a lot of conduit in the ground. Well, that conduit is a tremendous asset for fiber build-outs. Well, I have watched communities make those agreements to say, we'll provide all of the conduits, we'll provide the maintenance for that, we'll provide, anywhere that those gaps are, we own the conduit side, and then the private partner comes in and says, we'll provide all the fiber side, and we're going to put in however many pairs, and we're going to carve out dedicated these many pairs for municipal access and control. So that's like I said, that's a shared beneficial partnership, and because there's the responsibility of providing the fiber on one side and the responsibility of providing the conduit maintenance and the conduit access on the other side, it's a mutually beneficial partnership. Other ones where I have seen attempts to try to monetize things like public lighting. Some of those have worked well, some of those have not worked well. And it has to do with looking at where the ROIs are and what the real driving needs are on either side of that partnership equation.
Right. So do you see, you've talked about a lot of the examples we've seen out there. We have seen municipalities monetizing, capitalizing their assets there. Do you see, is this discussion happen, do you think, in every municipality? Is it, are we building a groundswell here, or is it just going to be a few here and there?
I'll go back to 2016, somewhere around that, around those few years. It was a groundswell. There was a lot of talk about monetization. We were talking about monetizing data. We were talking about monetizing assets. And it really did create a groundswell because at face value, that looks and sounds very, very appealing to municipalities. Sadly and unfortunately, there were agreements and initiatives that were kicked off with that basis that resulted in not optimum outcomes. I'll leave it at that. And that's a challenge. And it's unfortunate for those cities where that happened, but it should also be kind of an awakening call for other municipalities and certainly for private sector too, for industry to look at this and say, what's the best way, what's the optimal way to go into these agreements and understand the full dynamics that are at play. I cannot emphasize enough, spending the amount of time on the front end, and this is where industry gets challenged, spending the time on the front end to really understand what the deliverable is and what that means to, municipality X, and for the municipality to spend the upfront time understanding what the needs of industry are into that partnership. That is absolutely crucial work that has to be done. And, industry is driving they're held to performance standards quarter over quarter, where municipalities are not necessarily, it's more administration over administration, right? And so the timetables look very different on either side, and understanding that up front, spending the due diligence in that will pay itself in huge dividends.
Right. Do you think there are municipalities that understand the needs of the industry, obviously, like you're talking?
I think more now, and sadly, and again, unfortunately, that's because of the result of some of the, what we would call quote unquote failed projects that were out there. A lot of lessons learned, a lot of understanding and insights gained from that. So I think some of those questions are being asked now. There are several municipalities. I'll take Las Vegas as an example. Understanding the driving needs of industry and then how to work that in for the benefit of the municipality. Michael Sherwood and his team out there in Las Vegas have done a great job of creating a pilot model. That's great for a city like Las Vegas, but again, you have to take that into account that the dynamics are very different for a municipality like that compared to a municipality like Sioux Falls, right? There may be opportunities for that, but that's not, again, it's not a template, if you will, for how to move forward in this. And again, I sound like a broken record, but spending the time, the due diligence upfront, understanding what the dynamics are is critical.
Right. So last couple of questions. Has COVID changed things? I know you've only been there a few months, but has COVID accelerated this trend of this public-private partnership?
I think COVID is a double-edged sword. I think it has proven to us that we can do things faster than we thought we could do them. But it also has shown us that if we don't have proper preparation, trying to make those change can be catastrophic. And catastrophic may be too strong of a word, but it may have unintended consequences on the backside. For example, almost every organization, private or public sector, looked at some element of either alternative work environment or remote work during those first few months of the COVID pandemic here in the US. Fortunately, there were a lot of things that were already in place, but think about the work if we hadn't done the work to get bandwidth, to get access to tools and resources, to get access to some of these new technologies, emergent technologies. If we hadn't dabbled in that for the years prior to, we would have been really, really challenged to provide a solution, and certainly provide a solution as quickly as we did. I think the other thing too is that COVID opens up the importance of digital tools, of what digital tools mean today and into the future. Digital workflow. Well, one of the things that was really challenged, I know not only for Sioux Falls, but for a lot of municipalities, was the reliance on hard signatures, right? We have had these paper processes and paper workflow. Well, when everybody's remote, that gets really, really challenged, and it becomes a burden and almost a liability for the municipality as opposed to a benefit. So looking at things like that, COVID forced organizations, both private and public sector, to look at things very, very differently. And some of those things that we thought were 5, 10, realizing are 5 or 10 months away. It's a way, way, way more compressed timeline than we thought.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so last question. We're talking here, it's January 2021 here at the beginning of the year. So from your perspective, where do you think we will be from a municipality, public-private partnership, smart city, however you want to call it? Let's say the end of this year and then the end of 2022, which doesn't seem that long away now.
I think one of the things that my hope is, and I'll lay it out there as a hope, is that organizations, especially municipalities and other government entities, that they realize the historic challenges of moving between administrations. And what I mean by that is when you're dealing with elected officials, there are different agendas that come in with each administration. It's not to say right or wrong, it's just understanding the impact of each administration upon the infrastructure that's in place and the operations that are in place. And every changeover of administration always creates an impact on what those operations and what that infrastructure looks like. Mm-hmm. What my hope is that operations begin to get the recognition and certainly the resource allocation that they need to sustain that for long periods of time, right? What we are wanting to achieve, here in Sioux Falls, I've told my team that we're working towards the 2025 clock, right? We're working on the 2025 clock, meaning this is a 5-year initiative to get the foundations and the infrastructure in place so that we're ready to be where we need to be in 2025, right? That's very different than saying, hey, by the end of this mayor's term or the next mayor's term, we're going to have this accomplished, right? Because we're anticipating that change. The hope is that we can drive some consistency across the organization for long periods of time and make change as technology grows, as technology evolves, and that we can be way, way, way more strategic than we've been reactive. That's the hope that I have, is these things that we're needing, municipalities are needing, especially focused in on outcomes and impacts to Joe or Jill Q citizen. Those things are becoming way, way, way more kind of in our face than they have been. And certainly, the demands from citizens, the demands from users of the city, whether you visit here, work here, play here, or live here, those demands are really forcing us to look at things way more critically than we have in the past.
Right. So what, if I get what you're saying here, as an investor then, or as a public-private company, I shouldn't be afraid coming to you wanting to talk a 5 or 10-year term on something. So if we're doing, you mentioned conduit and fiber, if I'm coming to your city asking, can we do a deal so I get access to that conduit, I shouldn't be scared of a 10-year deal to make that happen. That fits into your timelines, right? No,
absolutely not. In fact, that is probably the better way to do that, because when you look at it, and again, looking at the dynamics of a municipality, you look at administration terms, and if you can get something in for 10 years or you're focused over 10 years, you get to do that across multiple administrations and certainly terms. And it's a great way to help build some consistency, to help build some stability into the infrastructure that's going on within the city.
Right. And by administration here, you're talking about the administration of Sioux Falls, not necessarily South Dakota or federal, right?
Well, it could be. I mean, I think that plays or maps on top of any type of term limits from an elected official, whether you're talking about city council, whether you're talking about state senate, state governor, city mayor, all of that comes into play just because of the kind of like the tail of the comet, right? There's a change, and then there's all the things that are affected by that change. And I think anytime that you're able to, one, anticipate that, you can prepare for it. And so as you prepare for it, you find ways to either minimize the turmoil that happens during those changes, or certainly to just, best case would be to not be impacted by those changes at all, those turnovers.
Well, great. Well, Mike, thank you very much. For those watching, we've been chatting with Mike Grigsby, who is Director of Innovation and Technology for the city of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. This is a long time to say all that. Mike, great conversation. Thanks very much.
No, Ian, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.